I'm going to go ahead and begin. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. It is such a pleasure to be able to share the cathedral and the gargoyles and grotesques of the cathedral with you today. I'm Mimi McNamara. I'm the creative director of the cathedral, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our spotlight talk on the gargoyles and grotesques of Washington National Cathedral. Docent Andrew Martin has led tower climbs and gargoyle tours at the cathedral for 10 years, but he has been a self-described turbo nerd his entire life. He studied medieval history at the College of William and Mary, Egyptology at the American University in Cairo, and library science at the University of Maryland, which, according to him, makes him a triple threat of pedantry. In 2008, he took a woman gargoyle hunting in the cathedral for a fourth date. It went so well, he eventually proposed to her in the center of our labyrinth. They were later married at the high altar, and both of their children were baptized here. Andrew also volunteered with the cathedral's Lego model of the cathedral, helping people snap bricks into place on what we hope will someday become the largest cathedral in the world built of Lego bricks. I'd like to take a moment to share a few housekeeping items. We are recording this talk. Following the event, we'll be sharing the link to the recording presentation with everyone who registered for the program. So again, please check your inbox for that email. We're using both the Q&A and the chat features. We ask that you use the chat to let us know where you're joining us from, as well as to ask general questions about the cathedral. The moderators will be dropping links in and general information as well, but we ask that you reserve the Q&A for questions for Andrew to answer following his talk. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, Andrew Martin.
Excellent. Thank you so very much, Mimi. I appreciate that. So Mimi mentioned, and part of my bio is that I first came to the cathedral to look at the gargoyles over 13 years ago on a date. I had just met a woman on eHarmony and things seemed like they were going really well. So well that I needed to know if when I said, cathedrals, gargoyles, if she said cool or ew, get away from me, you weirdo, because then I would have to call things off in a hurry. Fortunately, things went well enough that, as Mimi mentioned, I later proposed to this same woman in the labyrinth at the center of the cathedral. We have been married for over 10 years now, and both of our children were baptized at the cathedral. All because I came gargoyle hunting at the cathedral to explore them, just like you guys are going to do today. So I'm not saying that anyone who's online right now is going to get engaged and married at the cathedral, but it's possible. I'm just saying that there's a precedent for it. So I am going to be taking you through the wonderful and wacky world of the gargoyles and grotesques of the Washington National Cathedral today. I am going to be stopping my video so that we can just concentrate on the slideshow that we have, because let's be honest, we've all been suffering under the pandemic a little bit. I have to shave this thing every morning, so I'm under no illusions about what's going on up here. Also, it's just a little bit greener if we are not sucking down all of the bandwidth to share a video. So again, I'm going to stop my video, and if you have any questions for me, you can use the Q&A, and Mimi will hit me up with that to make sure that I answer your questions. So stopping the video now. Please let us know in the chat if you cannot see the gargoyles of Washington National Cathedral displayed on the PowerPoint presentation that we are about to share. I'm going to give one look just to make sure that there's no one screaming. And everyone seems to be doing all right. So with no further ado, all right, this thing that's flying in right now is a legacy graphic left over from whomever built this this PowerPoint presentation back in like 1993. I had inherited this presentation when I took over the gargoyle tours, and while I've made a lot of changes to it, there's a couple of things left over. And I would absolutely, if I were to scrap this and rebuild it, I would get rid of this guy right here because he is not a gargoyle, he's not on our cathedral, and he's not even from the Middle Ages. That guy is 3 lies for the price of 1. This guy is from the Cathedral of Notre Dame de Paris. I'm sure we all watched with horror a couple of years ago when that cathedral caught fire and burned, and we're hoping that it'll be restored to its ultimate glory at some point. But it's what we think of as the Ur-Gothic cathedral, the one that is sort of the model on which all others are kind of based, and it is one of the first ones. But now, if you're a fan of the movie or the book, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, you know a little bit about that cathedral. So what you probably don't know is that the original title for Victor Hugo's book was not Hunchback of Notre Dame, it was Notre Dame de Paris. The church is actually the main character of that book, that magnificent Gothic cathedral, and Victor Hugo wrote it to bring awareness to the fact that that cathedral was falling apart and decaying and in such need of restoration, they were actually getting ready to tear it down. They were going to bulldoze it, and they were going to put up a Renaissance monstrosity, some horrible thing with a dome or something. But fortunately, his book was a runaway bestseller. It was the Da Vinci Code, or the Harry Potter of the 1830s. And it was such a huge success that it got people interested in the cathedral again. And they started coming back, and they said, we got to raise the money to save this cathedral. Whew! Thank goodness it was restored instead of being bulldozed. But the thing was, suddenly everyone's climbing up the cathedral, and they're not finding all of the really creepy, ghastly, ghouly things that were promised by the books. In the book, they talk about Quasimodo hanging out among the grinning monstrosities. So the guy who was restoring it, a guy named Viollet-le-Duc, said, all right, we got to get some more monstrosities up here. And he quickly went out, and they slapped together a bunch of sort of early 19th century forgeries. So these guys, if you go like I did and climb, we went on our honeymoon to Notre Dame de Paris, and we climbed the tower. Hopefully one day soon we'll be able to do that again. And you stood right next to this, and you can see this is cheap concrete. It is a fake. It looks kind of like what you would get from Design Toscano or Fountains of Wayne. So 3 lies for the price of 1, that statue right there. But you'll still see its image all over on every cover of every gargoyle book in history. So I said it's not a gargoyle. And what did I mean by that? When I ask people what purpose gargoyles serve, I get a couple of answers that everyone usually says. First of all, people say, oh, it's to scare the evil spirits away. That's why we have these utterly horrible, disgusting images on the outside of our churches. Another thing, if they've heard a little bit, if they've read a little bit more, they might have heard the theory that it's to keep the sacred and the profane separate. So on the inside of your church, you have beautiful things like angels and evangelists and beautiful stained glass windows. But on the outside, you have the horrible, grotesque shapes of the gargoyles. And that's to separate it and show that the inside of the church is sacred and the outside world is disgusting and profane. But the real reason that we have gargoyles, the reason that there have been these carvings on buildings for as long as people have had buildings, is far more simple than that. It's a functional one. It's this one right here. So this thing is, let me back up here. This thing right here is a gargoyle. This one is not a gargoyle. And the difference between these two, and both of them look like really good, beautiful carvings, is this right here, this pipe. A gargoyle has to have a pipe because it's part of the drainage system. It is a carved downspout. The word gargoyle comes from the same word as gargle, or in Spanish, the word garganta, which means throat. So if it doesn't have a pipe, it's not a gargoyle. This is what gargoyles are actually for. They help keep the water off the roof of the cathedral. This gargoyle in this picture is one of the neatest gargoyles at the cathedral. It is the American timber rattlesnake. And you see it's piled up in kind of a triangular shape. And this shape actually mimics the Gadsden flag, that yellow flag that has been used on license plates as a symbol of the Tea Party. But at the time that this gargoyle was made, was just a Revolutionary War flag. And so it's piled up in a shape that you'll see no rattlesnake in living history actually go. So they wanted, because our cathedral is not a copy of any European cathedral, it's its own American cathedral, the creators wanted to have an American species. So they chose the American timber rattlesnake, and they carved it, and they presented it to the dean for approval. And he looked at the fangs, and he looked at the rattle, and he said, that's pretty good. But what happens if someone walks up from the wrong side and they don't see the rattle? And the carver shrugged and said, you've got a good point. And he put another rattle on the other side. So this is the only twin rattled American timber rattlesnake in existence, and it's here on our cathedral. And if you come, you can see it. It's nice and down low. It's very easy to spot. But here you see it in the midst of a real driving rainstorm, serving the function that gargoyles serve, which is to keep the water off the roof. So now here are the gargoyles in action. This is our cathedral, and you can see the water spouting out of the gargoyles' mouths. The gargoyles actually act as a secondary drainage system. We have a whole set of gutters and downspouts on the cathedral, just like on your house at home, that do most of the work of getting the rain off of the cathedral. But the gargoyles kick in when there's a real gully washer. In the gutters, there's actually a little bit of a lip around the pipes that lead down to the gargoyles, so they only kick on when the water is really flowing. And if you're ever at the cathedral and you see everyone who works for the cathedral immediately rush outside with their cameras, it might be because there's a rainstorm that is heavy enough to have started the gargoyles spouting. Now, in this picture, you can see the real reason why these gargoyles are so important. This part at the base of the wall flares out, which means that it gets the direct hit of the rain when it falls. So as a result, this is the same stone as the rest of the cathedral, but it has become gross and black and mottled with the damage from the acid rain, with the lichen and everything that has grown on that. So if the water came and ran straight down the walls in a smooth sheet, the whole cathedral would be this grotty black color, instead of the beautiful white limestone that you see when you come to the cathedral today. This here is Notre Dame de Paris. This is another picture I took on my honeymoon. So on an authentic medieval cathedral, you can see how the gargoyles, which do all of the work of getting the rain off the roof, have to be much longer, and there have to be much more of them. So this cathedral has to literally bristle with all of the gargoyles. It looks like a porcupine, and you can see all of them jutting out so that they could make sure that the water really gets enough of a momentum and a jolt so that it goes shooting out and does not go coursing down the edges of the cathedral. So a medieval cathedral will tend to have longer gargoyles than the ones that we have here on our cathedral. At the cathedral, we have 112 gargoyles and almost 1,200 grotesques. And again, grotesque, we use that word normally to mean horrible and ugly, but at our cathedral, many of the grotesques are beautifully carved angels and are wonderful representations. But we use the term grotesque just to mean any carved decoration on the cathedral which does not have a water spout. Now, I said that we have 112 gargoyles at the cathedral. We actually nowadays only have 111 gargoyles. And that's because of what happened on August 23rd, 2011. And that's when the earthquake hit the cathedral. This is what it looked like when they went up right after the earthquake. When it happened, they cleared everyone out because there was some worry that the whole cathedral might come down. And once they knew it was safe enough to go up, at least, they went up to the very top of the central Gloria in Excelsis tower, and this is what they found. And you can see this horrible damage. This is a grotesque that's a beautiful angel that came plummeting down off of one of the pinnacles. You can also see the huge several tons of the grand pinnacles that came down. And this is where we got really lucky. The damage to the cathedral has been catastrophic. I think they estimated it was about $60 million worth of damage was done by the earthquake. And we have been raising money as fast as we can to fix it, but we still have about another $20 million worth of damage to fix on the cathedral. And as bad as that is, we lucked out because these pinnacles fell inward. You can see this is the pinnacle where this thing came falling down from. And it came and it fell about 30 feet to the roof of the tower, and the tower held. If it had fallen the other direction, out this way, it would have gone over the edge and it would have fallen hundreds of feet, plummeting and picking up energy, and it would have gone through the roof of the cathedral like a bomb. And a Gothic cathedral like this is a conglomeration of enormous forces held in perfect tension by all of the arches and flying buttresses. And the roof of the cathedral, then the ceiling arches are like part of an eggshell holding it all together. So if the roof goes, the whole thing goes. So we got really lucky that the damage from the earthquake wasn't more, but we still have a really long ways to go until we can fix everything. And the cathedral, we get no money from any state, local, or national government, of course, but we get no money from the Diocese of Washington either. We kick money back to them. So the only thing that helps keep the lights on at the cathedral and pay for repairs is when we pass the plate on Sunday, and when people like you come and pay for programs like Gargoyle tours. So I know that this one online is free, but we really appreciate any contribution that you can make. And when the pandemic is over, we want to invite everyone to come and enjoy these programs in person at the cathedral, because we have a really, really cool set of programs to offer you. And there are lots of really awesome things that you can do. So this is the view of the damage right after the earthquake. This is not what it looks like at the top of the tower right now, because let's face it, this looks like a game of drunken Jenga right now. They've stabilized all this. They've put big iron bands around it and clamped things down. But you can see how fragile this looks and how close it was to all of the stuff actually coming down. There was only one gargoyle that was actually damaged in the earthquake. What happened was actually part of the pinnacle up top came off, came down and clipped this guy right on the ear. Right there, you can see the damage, and it snapped the stone, but the friction of the stone on the pipe held. And so when they went up there to inspect it, they found it just dangling. And Master Mason Joe Alonzo, that's him right there on the left, said that when he grabbed it, it just slid right off in his hands. So that was the only gargoyle that was actually lost during the earthquake. Now, here's another image that we have. This gargoyle is the famous story of the cat that was belled by the mice. This is what we used to use before we got that picture of the rattlesnake and the rain. This was what we used to demonstrate what gargoyles are actually for. And the sharp-eyed among you may notice something that's missing right here. We've got the water coming out. What you don't have is any rain. So this image does not show Master Mason Joe Alonzo standing out of frame right up here with a huge bucket of water that he is dumping directly into the downspout in order to get this action shot of the cathedral. Now, in the winter, the cathedral's roof gets hot because it's metal and it's exposed to the sun. So if freezing rain or snow lands on the cathedral, it melts, and then a slurry of barely thawed water comes running out the gargoyles, and it forms these absolutely magnificent ice beards. So you can see these icicles dripping out of the mouths of the cathedral, and it's one of the most spectacular things that you can see at the cathedral. There's a cathedral in France, Reims Cathedral, which during World War I, a German shell hit the roof of the cathedral and set it on fire. And the lead that made up the roof of the cathedral melted in the ensuing fire and ran out of the gargoyles' mouths. So if you go to Reims Cathedral today, you can see the gargoyles that are belching lead, just like this gargoyle is belching ice. All right, so first we're going to talk about grotesques. And again, grotesques are any decorative carving on the outside of the cathedral that does not have a pipe. I'm going to start off with my favorite of the grotesques, this guy, Toothsome, or as he's nicknamed by the docents, chompers. Looks like he is eating the side of the cathedral. And the best thing about this guy is he is up so high that he is invisible from the ground. All you can see is a bump on a rock. So this guy is positioned on a balcony such that you see him if you're walking around and just suddenly turn a corner and come face to face with this ferocious visage and go, ah! Now, a lot of the grotesques come in matched pairs. They're thematically matched. So this guy right here, he's chowing down on a chicken leg here. He's got his drumstick on. You can see his big teeth. You can see his boogers here. This guy is right on the other side of the buttress from this guy who has sunken cheeks and a hollowed face and an open mouth. This is gluttony and famine as a matched set. Right over here on this buttress, we have a little baby having a temper tantrum, playing with his toy, playing with his rattle. And across from him is old age. This is what this grotesque looks like. Now, to give you an idea of scale, this is about the size of a fat grapefruit. It's about two fists put together. So when that is put 150, 200 feet up in the air, it's almost invisible from the ground, which is why when you come to the cathedral for a gargoyle tour, we do a slideshow before walking you around because he's impossible to see without binoculars. Oh, excuse me. So here's a matched set that really tells you that part of the cathedral was built during a certain time. This is the West Towers that were built in the 80s during Reagan's America during the new Cold War. And this guy over here on the left is cowering in fear behind a gas mask. And then over here is a monstrous guy with a ferocious look. He's holding on to a bomb. His hair is made out of bombs and his finger is on the button. So this is the warmonger about to start nuclear war and the pacifist cowering in fear from it. Over on the other side, we have this little robot here. He's a medical robot. You see the little beep, beep, beep of an EKG monitor right there. And across the buttress from him is this guy right here, which is a robotic camera. Now, the funny thing about this guy is that if you stand right where this grotesque is and look down the hill at what it's pointed at, you realize that this camera is pointed at the Russian embassy. And there's a story handed down from docent to docent. It's too good to check, but I'm going to tell you guys anyway, assuming you recognize that this is probably too good to be true. But the story is that when this stone was on the ground, some gentlemen with ill-fitting suits and thick accents came by to take a look at it and make sure that it was just a stone camera. And it is, it's just a grotesque. This guy right here, now you can see he has a 5 o'clock shadow. And that means that he is a stone carver. He's one of the people who made the cathedral. Now the stone carvers would shave at the end of the day instead of at the morning, like most people. And the reason for that is that if you got a nick or a cut, then the stone dust would get into that nick or cut that you cut yourself shaving, and it would really aggravate it and it would become infected. So the stone carvers would shave at the end of the day instead of the beginning. So if you see someone with a 5 o'clock shadow, you know it's a stone carver. You can also see right here, this is his stone carver's tools. He's got his chisel. Over here is his mallet. This is a guy named Vince Palumbo, who is a really interesting character at the construction of the cathedral. You can see he's also got a flask of booze tucked away into his hip pocket. So Vince Palumbo would do stone carving up on the high parts of the cathedral. He would go up on the scaffolding and work on the carvings, the gargoyles and the grotesques. And the cathedral is located right across the quad from the National Cathedral School for Girls. And when the bell would ring and the girls would come out of class, Vince Palumbo, he would wink and whistle at the high school girls as they were walking the quad. And people would say, Vince, you gotta cut that out. That's totally not cool. What's gonna happen when the dean sees you? What's the dean gonna say? Well, on the other side of the buttress from Vince Palumbo is the dismayed dean. This is Dean Francis Sayre, and you can see he's not at all happy with what his employee is doing right here. Now, Dean Sayre You can see he's holding his prayer book. He's got his angel wings. He's got his halo. He's also got a hole in his shoe where he's worn out his shoe leather going around to raise money for the cathedral. But Dean Sayer is also the reason why we have gargoyles on the cathedral. Remember, I said that there are a couple of reasons why people put gargoyles on cathedrals. There's to keep the evil spirits away, there's to separate the sacred and the profane, and of course, there's the functional reason that they act as downspouts. But the real reason why we have gargoyles on our cathedral is the reason why we have 316 people giving up their fabulous, beautiful spring afternoons to sit in front of a screen and look at pictures of stone carvings. And that is because gargoyles are awesome. People love gargoyles. People think gargoyles are great. The only thing that you would like better than a gargoyle of a gargoyle is your gargoyle. If you could design a gargoyle yourself, you might pay a lot of money for it. So the first makers of the cathedral didn't put any gargoyles on. They only put carvings. They only put on grotesques. But when Dean Sayer took over, he knew that people loved gargoyles, and he started letting people sponsor gargoyles. So people would come and they would pay way more than the cost of the stone and the cost of the labor, and they would have their gargoyles crafted into the shape of family, of friends, of pets, or just of images that they particularly like. So the gargoyles are a fundraising technique, and it's one of the reasons why there are so many fun and interesting stories behind the gargoyles at our cathedral. So when you look up at the gargoyles at the cathedral, remember we have Francis Sayer to thank for it. These two blocks right here are uncarved and will remain forever uncarved. They are a memorial to the only person who died during the construction of the cathedral. He was a stone carver named Joseph Ratty, and he was up on some scaffolding doing some carving inside the cathedral in the nave, and the scaffolding collapsed and he fell and died later in the hospital. And Dean Sayer said that because only God and Joseph Ratty knew what these were going to be, they were his next project, that they should remain forever uncarved in his memory. So this is a memorial to the only person who died during the construction of the cathedral. Now, above the grotesques that I've just shown you is a whole section of the West Towers that we call Noah's Ark. And it's a whole bunch of animals. And I'm going to show you a couple of them here. But I particularly like this one right here, because this is probably not an animal that was on Noah's Ark, at least not as the authors of the Bible thought, because this is a huge bug. This is a fly or something. And as you can see, he's holding a can of Raid. And the animals on the towers are matched. So just like on Noah's Ark, the animals went in 2 by 2. If you look at our towers, if you see a fly in one place, you'll see a fly at the exact spot on the other tower. Donkey in one place, donkey in the other place. So the matching grotesque, the other fly, is holding a fly swatter. So this is a little bit of an unpaid product placement right here. This guy right here, cute little squirrel eating an acorn. This guy right here, so we have a praying mantis. This guy is a warthog. And we have a little cute chameleon. Unfortunately, all of these are too high up to be seen from the ground, even if you come to the cathedral. So we have good pictures of them here for you to see. Above Noah's Ark, at the highest point on the West Towers, is an angel band. There are a couple of hundred of beautiful, beautiful angels that have been carved, almost all of them by a sculptor named J. Hall Carpenter, who started off at the cathedral. He wanted to be a stone carver, so he went to the stone carvers and applied. And he was just a kid. He was 16 years old, and he said, "What do I have to do to become a stone carver?" And they said, and they handed him a broom and said, "Get sweeping, kid." So J. Hall Carpenter started by sweeping up the stone chips in the stone carver's lodge, and eventually he moved on to become a carver and ultimately a sculptor. So he did these sculptures for all of these angels that are up on the Western Towers. And I always find it amusing that there is room in J. Hall Carpenter's concept of heaven for not one, but 2 different accordion players. This is my favorite of the angels in the angel band right here, because this is just an angel reading a book to a little kid. As both a father and a librarian, this one really speaks to me. Now, next to that is a carving of an angel holding something unusual. Now, in the 80s, they made a movie out of a documentary movie about the stone carvers of the National Cathedral, called, appropriately enough, The Stone Carvers of the Washington National Cathedral. You can still find it on YouTube right now. But anyway, it won an Oscar for Best Documentary. So Marjorie Hunt, the documentary filmmaker, was turned into the stone carvers to recognize that. They made an image of her holding her Oscar statuette. So if you come to the cathedral one day soon, hopefully we will reopen and you can come back for tower climbs, and we can climb up to the tippity top of the Northwest Tower, and I can show you the angel holding the Oscar statuette. Now, this is what it looked like before these guys were installed. You see here are parts of the angel band. They're holding the tambourine. And this is the answer to the question that I get all the time when I give gargoyle tours. Are they making any more of them? No, unfortunately, the last gargoyles were put on the cathedral back in the 80s when we were just when the construction was coming to an end. Because you see, they're built in as you go. You have just stone that sticks out and has a gargoyle carved on it, another stone. So these big blocks of stone, they're called vousards, show you how the cathedral was built with the gargoyles already in place. And so, what that means is that usually you could do your carving on the ground. It's only when you didn't get your work done in time and that piece had to go in before you did the carving that you had to carve 300 feet in the air, perched precariously on some scaffolding. Now, it is a pity that you can't add any more gargoyles to the cathedral, because as I mentioned, they were a fundraising technique. If we could add more gargoyles, if we could just, I don't know, get some epoxy and slap some on, maybe we could have the Tesla and the Microsoft and the Facebook gargoyles and pay for all the damage to the cathedral right away. So now let's get to the main event, the gargoyles themselves. This guy right here, this is a rabbit, but the mirth of the stone carvers got them a little bit creative, and you can see it's got some reptilian scales right here. So this guy is the scaly rabbit. This guy right here, when I ask people to identify him, I usually get bat, I usually get pig. He's actually a Basenji. Now, it's a barkless African dog. So this family gave the money to have their pet turned into a gargoyle. They wanted him to have a bone in his mouth, but the stone carvers said, no, if you put a bone in his mouth and it's sticking out sideways, that's going to be something that's going to erode away fairly quickly. That might erode away in as little as 1,000 years. Now, that sounds like a really long time to us, but that gives you an idea of the eternal scale in which the creators of the cathedral thought and worked. So what they did was they have him holding the bone between his front paws right here. So this is the Basenji, the barkless African dog. And when they dedicated this gargoyle, the little boy and his mommy were there, and they were looking up at the gargoyle, and she said, just think, in hundreds of years, people will be able to come here and look up and see our little pet dog. And he said, Mommy, I hope in hundreds of years, we'll be able to look down and see our little pet dog. Next to the Basenji, we have this guy right here. All owls are wise. This guy has a mortarboard with a tassel. He has his diploma rolled up, and he has his textbook right here. This owl has just graduated from college. Next to the owl, we have this cute little kid. Look at him. He's playing with a truck, his shoes untied. He's so well behaved that he's got a halo because he's angelic. Well, next to him is his brother. His brother is got a broken halo, and his hand is in the cookie jar. So there's two grandsons, one good and one bad. There was a woman who gave the money for two gargoyles to represent her grandchildren, and she never said which is which. This guy right here, everyone out there has probably had a boss that made them want to, I don't know, write something bad on the bathroom wall or post something on Facebook or Twitter about how bad they were. Well, you can see the 5 o'clock shadow. This is a stone carver. The stone carvers had a boss named Roger Merigi, who was just had a volcanic temper. He could blow up at anything. So you see this guy as carved, he has a cloven hoof, he has a devil's tail, and he has devil horns, because Roger Merigi was at least half devil. You can also see he's got a pistol, he's got a flask of whiskey, and he's got a knife in his pocket right here. And he is holding onto his hat to keep it from blowing sky high in a volcanic eruption of temper. And he's actually got a little mushroom cloud coming out of his head right there. And you might wonder what his face was like, because they brought him around, they installed it without checking with him, brought him around, and then dropped the sheet. And well, that's what his face was like. And you might wonder which of these two is the more hideous. I'll leave it up to you. But in later years, when Roger Merigi came back, he was so proud. He always made sure to bring visitors over so they could see his gargoyle. Now, here's one where the donors said, we don't care what it looks like. We just want it to be the scariest gargoyle. So they've got this thing. It's got 2 faces. It's got 3 sets of arms and legs. I wouldn't want to meet this coming down a dark alley and late at night. But for me, this is far and away the scariest, far from the scariest gargoyle at the cathedral. But we're going to watch, and you can let me know at the end of the presentation if you think this is the scariest gargoyle or if you have something else in mind. This one right here is from an old nursery rhyme. Tom, Tom, the piper's son, stole a pig and away did run. So we have a pig thief, and you can see he's got a goose that he's stolen, and he's actually riding on the pig that he has stolen. But he has been caught by the farmer's guard dog right here. So he has not made a clean getaway. But what kills me the most about this gargoyle is his French cuffs and his blazer. So this is someone who has really fallen on hard times and is dressed way too well to be stealing from a farmyard. Here's a better look at Tom, Tom, the piper's son. And in the background, you can see another gargoyle. It's a really cute little bunny rabbit there. Look at him, guys. Cute little bunny rabbit who is being swallowed by a boa constrictor. This gargoyle right here is actually shaped like this on the cathedral. This is the first gargoyle that J. Hall Carpenter did on the cathedral. And he said, all the other gargoyles have the good stuff on top. I'm going to carve this guy upside down so I can put the good stuff on the bottom. Now, this gargoyle is one that Vince Palumbo was slacking a little bit. He didn't get around to carving it until it had to be installed. And so it was installed as a blank piece of stone, and it did have to be carved in situ. It had to be carved up in the air on scaffolding. And so the cathedral is built in authentic medieval style. It is honest masonry, but they used power tools and cranes and stuff. It's not like the Renaissance fair. They weren't walking around in frilly shirts and faking English accents. So when they carved the cathedral, they could use those power drills to drill right through a block of stone so that the pipe could go through. But in the Middle Ages, they didn't have those. So they would dig a trench along the back of the cathedral, along the back of the gargoyle, and then only drill through right at the very tip, so that it would look like the water was coming out of the mouth of the gargoyle. So because this had to be carved in situ, it is an authentic medieval gargoyle that has just a trench instead of a pipe. So here is another one from the very top of Notre Dame de Paris. This is an authentic medieval gargoyle, and you can see it's a trench with just the mouth carved through right there. And this is another picture that I took on my honeymoon, and unfortunately, all of this roof right here, you see, was destroyed in the fire a couple of years ago. But fortunately, the gargoyles are intact. This is a gargoyle, another one that was carved in situ within, has just a trough rather than a pipe. This is a very DC institution. This is the crooked politician. You can see he's got horns, devil horns. He's also smoking a big old stogie. And on the side, you can see he has the scales of justice, and he is poking them awry. He is poking them out of alignment. And here you can see the water trough right there. Right here, this kitty cat, which is looking at a mouse with an expression that is either friendly or hungry, this cat is wearing a square hat called a tam. And this is what they give to all of the cathedral docents. Well, all of the women cathedral docents. They don't give them to the men. I asked. And it's called a tam, and it's the sign of the cathedral aides, is what they used to call the docents. So this one is called the catty aid. So this gargoyle honors and represents all of the volunteers who serve at the cathedral. So this is my gargoyle on the cathedral. Right next to it is a big mouth son of a gun holding a big book to his throat. This is another very DC thing. This is the lawyer gargoyle. Now, above him, this is an interesting chap. He's tucked away into a corner so you can barely see him from the ground. He's kind of facing a little access stairway. And remember, I told you that a lot of the gargoyles sort of represent the day and age in which they were built. This is built in the late 60s, and he is a hippie. So you can see he's got long hair. He's got a protest sign. He's putting his hand to his ear to listen to the will of the people. And apparently for some reason, in the late 60s, being a hippie meant that you had to carry a baguette everywhere. I don't know. Don't ask me. I didn't design it. So this is where the hippie is located. You can see he's actually a false gargoyle. They were going to drill out the bell of his horn right here so that the pipe would go out there, but they never got around to it. So he's a false gargoyle, actually a grotesque. And you can see that he's oriented so that you can barely see him from the ground. It's almost like the stone carvers carved him and said, oh, and the boss has said, you had to do a hippie? All right, fine. Just put him somewhere out of the way where no one's going to see him. So to be a hippie, you need a couple of things. You need your musical instrument, you need your long hair, you need your tattered clothing, your protest sign, you need your bell bottoms and your bare feet, but there's something even more important, and that is doobage. That's right, his bag of weed right here, according to the stone carver himself, that contains the hippie's stash of primo marijuana there. Here, we have a different sort. This guy faces that National Cathedral School for Girls that I told you about. And this is the school administrator. He's like the principal of the National Cathedral School for Girls. And the image of Hurst Hall, the building of the cathedral school, is hung like a millstone around his neck. And I'm sure that if you're the principal of a girls' school, it feels like a millstone around your neck most of the time. Around the corner from him is an interesting thing to see on the outside of a Christian church. This guy, he's not Zamfir, but look at the panpipes. That's right, it is Pan himself. It is the Greek god of chaos, frenzy, and partying down. He represents all of the music that happens at the cathedral. My wife sings with the Cathedral Choral Society, so this is her gargoyle at the National Cathedral. Over from Pan, we have this boss hog looking guy with the huge chins. He's got the napkin tied around his neck. He's got a fork and a knife. And in his belly is a little face representing his insatiable hunger. This is glutton, the glutton or gluttony. Above him is a family wanted to give a gargoyle to represent their father. And he worked as a dentist. And they said, let's do a big tooth. And then they pointed out that from 250 feet down, a tooth was just going to look like a rock. So instead, they have a guy giving a cleaning to an animal with enormous teeth. So you see the walrus here is reclining in a dentist's chair, and you can see the dentist giving a cleaning to the walrus tusks. There's his dental tool there, and there's his little dentist's mirror. Next to him is a gargoyle that honors an avid golfer. You can see the golf hands right here, and the shaft of the golf club is where the gargoyle's pipe comes out right there. Over on the other tower, we have this gargoyle. This is one of the biggest and highest gargoyles at the cathedral. This is a fallen angel. He fell out of heaven but he caught himself on a branch before he hit the ground, but his halo came off, and you can see that it caught around his arm right there. And next to him is the skeletal horse gargoyle, and it's one of the easiest ones to see if you ever come to the cathedral. This gargoyle right here represents the family gave it to represent their father, who's an avid bird watcher. And you can see he's got his binoculars, he's got his bird book, and his hand is actually holding up his neck because he's gotten so tired from looking up at the birds all the time. Next to that is one of two state gargoyles at the cathedral. And you recognize this right here. It's exactly what you think it is. It is the St. Louis Gateway Arch. And the state animal of Missouri is the bear. So this is the Missouri bear holding the St. Louis Arch. The other state gargoyle is the Wisconsin badger, which is around the corner. This one right here, we have a donkey and an elephant gargoyle, but they don't represent the political parties. Although we do have grotesques up in Noah's Ark called the political animals, but this one represents something different. This honors a long-term manager of the bookshop of the cathedral, which is what we now call the gift shop. But when you run a gift shop or a bookshop, you have to have a really good memory, and everyone knows that elephants never forget. And you have to be good at balancing the books. I'm sorry, guys, I don't write them, I just do them. It is not my fault that we have these horrible puns here. Around the corner is Kiddo the bulldog. Kiddo was the family pet of the second Episcopal Bishop of Washington, Bishop Harding, who was actually interred down in the crypt of the cathedral. Kiddo is carved on his sarcophagus. So Kiddo is at the cathedral simultaneously in the lowest and the highest points at the cathedral. And from the look on his face, you can tell which might be his favorite, because this dog is obviously terrified of heights. This one is an interesting concoction. It looks like, well, I don't know what the heck this looks like. In the guidebook, it is officially described as a toothy duck, which, okay, whatever. But the interesting thing is not what this gargoyle is or looks like, it's what's hidden in it. Looking out from the mouth of this toothy duck is a person with a camera. The name of this gargoyle is Candid Camera, and it represents everyone who comes to the cathedral to take pictures. So if you ever come to the cathedral and come on one of our gargoyle tours, this is your gargoyle. Around the corner is another ferocious creature, but he is sticking his fingers in his ears because he is refusing to listen to the word of God. This is an image so dear to the stonecarvers' hearts that they did it twice. Now, remember I said that the money for the gargoyles was paid to represent real people, sometimes husbands, sometimes other family members. This is a wife who gave the money to have her husband represented as a gargoyle. So he's wearing a business suit. He's carrying a briefcase. The official name for this gargoyle is the yuppie, but our notion of what constitutes a yuppie is kind of moved on. So we usually refer to it as the businessman. And you can see this guy has an enormous schnoz, a just Brobdingnagian proboscis of Cyrano de Bergerac level proportion. He's also got really long hair because he was always so busy at the office. He never had any time to get his hair cut. And you can also see he's got a divining rod for sniffing out the almighty dollar. This is a pretty snarky gargoyle right here. I can't help but think that maybe this family should have taken the money they spent on a gargoyle and invested in some marital counseling instead. But I'm sure it was all in good fun. Next to the yuppie, or the businessman, is this turtle right here, who is actually shedding a tear. He is weeping for the fate of the world's oceans. This guy is almost impossible to see. He's only visible through a set of quatrefoils. So if you come to the cathedral, he's almost impossible to see, and you'll have to have him pointed out to you. This guy right here, in a fit of creativity, the stone carvers named this one Downward Gazing Dragon. Now, I told you that the gargoyles only kick on when there's a really heavy rainstorm. And that's a good thing because the birds love to come and make their nests in the mouth of the gargoyles. And downward gazing dragon, for some reason, is their favorite. And all I can say is that I hope that the baby bird that is in that nest grew up and learned to fly on his own before the next real gully washer of a rainstorm, because otherwise he would have had to learn to fly in an awful hurry. This right here is the protective mother cat. So here's the mother cat, and here is the little kitty cat, the little kitten that is being clutched to the protective mother cat's chest. There are the ears. It's actually upside down. So there are the ears, and there's the nose right there. All right, here's the army. This is the donkey that goes with that elephant gargoyle that I showed you. It's actually the army mule. The woman who donated this was married to the head of the quartermaster corps of the United States Army. Now, the quartermaster is the guy who is in charge of making sure that the army has all of the bullets and the food and the wet wipes and everything you need to fight a war. And in the olden days, those were pulled up on mule-drawn carts. So the mule is the symbol of the quartermaster corps. And so when it came time to buy a gargoyle for her husband, she decided that she would like to have him depicted for all time as a jackass on the side of the Washington National Cathedral. Next to the mule is a wild boar. Whoops, excuse me. Yep. So here we have the wild boar. You can see his tusks right there. And the next one, this is a cute little puppy dog. Sometimes it's called a watchdog. But I love this one because I have a basset hound. You may have heard my basset hound contributing to the presentation a little bit earlier as she decided to show the cats who's really in charge. But this floppy-eared dog right here is my dog's gargoyle on the cathedral. This one right here, we love this one. This is the crocagator. And we can't decide whether it's a crocodile or an alligator, so we call it the crocagator. And then we have this cute little frog right here who is a great one for spouting. He gets really, really good distance when there's a gully washer and the rain starts falling. Now, I'm going to assume that of the 323 participants we have right here, a lot of you are Harry Potter fans. For the rest of you who might not be Harry Potter fans, what's wrong with you guys? Get the books, see the movies. They're awesome. They're cool. For those of you who are Harry Potter fans, you probably remember that the bad guy, his name is Voldemort. And he has evil followers named Death Eaters. And you can tell a Death Eater because they have a specific tattoo called the Dark Mark. The Dark Mark is a skull with a snake crawling through it. And this gargoyle right here, whose official name is Decay, is a skull with a snake crawling through it. It is monstrously creepy. From below, you can see the rib cage. You can see the serpent coiled up inside the skull. Now, obviously, this was put up decades before J.K. Rowling ever put pen to paper. So, and like I mentioned, the official name for this is Decay. It's not the Dark Mark. But what it means is that one of two possibilities. First of all, either there's something just inherently creepy about skulls with snakes crawling through them, or there was a secret Death Eater on staff at the Washington National Cathedral. I know which story I like better. But for my money, this is the scariest gargoyle at the cathedral. This is my favorite. This is by far and away the creepiest, and I absolutely love it. And there's only one thing that could possibly be creepier than this gargoyle right here. And that is Darth Vader himself, the Dark Lord of the Sith. I'm going to start my video and pause the sharing because I need to show you this guy right here. I got this in our gift shop. You should have seen the look on my wife's face when I brought it home. But Darth is way up high on the top of one of the highest towers at the cathedral. And this is molded directly from the actual maquette that they did. This is a life-size copy of the Darth Vader grotesque. So you see, he's life-size, see? He's just the size of a human head. And he sticks out just like this. So without binoculars or a telescope, he really just looks like a doorknob. All right, let's see here. Pause sharing, resume sharing. All right, so you're back to being able to see this. So if you're local or if you're not, and you come to the cathedral and you're looking for Darth Vader, you can come and stand right here and look for the 3 points on the northwest tower. Those points are called pinnacles. So he's on the northwest tower. That's the side that's almost always in shadow. So the dark side of the cathedral. So if you look at, you find the middle of those 3 points and you come down, he is in this triangle right here. So you look for the 3 points, follow it down, and at the base of this point right here, that's where Darth is. Now, you may be wondering how we came to have a Dark Lord of the Sith on our cathedral. And it's an interesting story. As the cathedral was coming towards completion, there was a magazine. It's called World Magazine. It's now called National Geographic for Kids. And they had a contest, a design a grotesque contest. And they said, kids, send us in your designs and we will pick the 4 best and actually carve them and put them on the cathedral. So they got over 1,900 entries from across the world, and they chose the 4 best. And of those 4, Darth Vader came in 4th, last place. That's right. We're not sure, but he may have been docked because he wasn't an original design. We're not sure. But I will tell you that Darth Vader is the single most asked about carving at the Washington National Cathedral. And the only time people ask us about the other ones are when they say, what could have possibly beaten Darth Vader? So the first prize went to the Sagacious Grotesque. So this guy was smart enough to bring an umbrella to keep off the rain right here. So second prize went to Bertha's Braces. You can see this is a little girl with braces. And when you're a little kid, really, what is scarier than the prospect of having to get braces? And the third one, this is the one who's next to Darth, is Lookout Raccoon, who is, I've been telling people, frankly, that this is Rocket Raccoon from the Guardians of the Galaxy, just to make him a little bit more interesting. But so those are the other 3. Now, here's what the actual designs looked like when they were submitted. So this is Bertha's Braces. This is Lookout Raccoon. So you can see that the sculptors took a little bit of liberty with that. And here is the Sagacious Grotesque. And this is what Darth looked like. You can see that they really, the kid who did this really, really excelled and did a fabulous job designing. He was a kid named Christopher Rader. And a friend of mine was working the docent's desk at the cathedral when a man came in and he said, does anyone ever ask about a Darth Vader carving? And they said only about 16 times a day. And it turns out it was Chris Rader come back, and they took him out and showed him and took him up in the tower so he could have a good look. So Christopher Rader has come back and visited Darth Vader. So he is a grotesque, not a gargoyle, because he doesn't have a downspout, but he is by far and away the most popular and the most asked about carving on the Washington National Cathedral. And so with that, I'm bringing our presentation to an end, and we can hit up any questions that you might have for us.
Thanks. I needed to unmute myself. Surprised. We have a number of questions for you, Andrew. One person in the chat came in a little late, so while I'm going through the Q&A, if you could recap why we have gargoyles in the first place.
Okay, so there are all sorts of reasons that you hear about why there are gargoyles. The most common one you hear is that it's to keep the evil spirits away. It's actually to get the rain off of the cathedral. They are carved downspouts, and they function to get the rain and keep it from running right down the side of the cathedral in a smooth sheet, because that's what really damages the stone. I see that here in the Q&A, there's a question: what does the water pouring through the gargoyles hit when it reaches the ground? Are there a series of French drains? Yeah, there's drainage on the grounds, because of course there's water coming off the cathedral and off of the grounds, and there has to be drainage around the grounds of the cathedral. Some of the gargoyles actually spout out onto roofs that are halfway up. So the upper gargoyles spout out onto the mid-level roofs, and then the water runs down from there and then out another gargoyle or into the gutters and downspouts.
And a couple of them have been blocked off actually because they were too close to door frames or other places and would flood. And so we do have a couple of real gargoyles that are now faux gargoyles because they've been had their throats closed.
Okay, next question. What else we got?
There's actually a couple questions about the design process. Who designs the gargoyles and grotesques? How are they selected? Who gets to decide what grotesque to create?
That's an interesting question. And I mean, it doesn't, like I said, there are no new gargoyles or grotesques being put onto the cathedral. So this was all a process that happened before. I think anyone who currently works at the cathedral is there. But there were a couple of different ways. When Dean Sayre first started putting gargoyles on the cathedral, he actually had a design a gargoyle contest, and he got a lot of submissions and chose a couple of them. But for a lot of them, it was just, hey, if you're willing to pay, then we can put your gargoyle up. And the donors would work with the carvers and the sculptors to come up with a final design. Like I said, there was some feedback. Sometimes they would say, hey, this isn't going to work. This is going to erode away if you put a bone in the mouth of the dog. Or if you want to have a dentist, it's better to have him giving a cleaning to a walrus rather than having a tooth. But a lot of them were just left up to the whimsy of the stone carvers. Now, I do know that theoretically, every carving, every stained glass, every bit of embroidery, every kneeler had to be approved by the iconography committee. Like there was someone who had to sign off on every single piece of design. But as you've seen today, some of these are so whimsical and a little bit naughty in a couple of cases that I have a feeling that either the iconography committee had a better sense of humor than you would expect from a bunch of dead white male churchmen, or they were kind of asleep at the switch for a while. Either way, we've got a lot more whimsy in the gargoyles and grotesques than you would expect.
Yeah, and there was a Canon Feller who was the clerk of the works, also oversaw a lot of that and may have had more leeway in granting permission than you might expect.
Cool.
Through a committee-based system. There's a question about were gargoyles or grotesques created first and where they might have appeared historically first.
Okay, so on our cathedral, we started putting grotesques on before we started putting gargoyles on. So if you come to the cathedral, and the cathedral was built from east to west. So you start building a cathedral in the east because that's where the high altar goes. It's the direction that faces the rising sun. And you build it from east to west instead of from the bottom up to the top, because that way you've got a usable church. You've got a roof, and you can just build out more sections, and you have a movable wall that you push along as you go. So on the east end of the church, the part that was built first, there are plenty of grotesques. A lot of them are things like archangels, but there are no gargoyles. So it's only at the middle of the church and to the west end that you start actually getting gargoyles. But as those parts were constructed, they were carving gargoyles and grotesques simultaneously and installing them at the same time. In terms of historically, people have been carving stone for far longer than they have been doing downspouts. So I would say there have been grotesques for longer than there have been gargoyles per se. But people have been putting carved downspouts on buildings almost as long as there have been buildings. There are carved downspouts on the Temple of Karnak. There are carved downspouts in temples in India. So for thousands and thousands of years, people have been enamored of the idea of carved downspouts on their buildings. So gargoyles are almost as old as human architecture itself.
Thank you. There are a whole bunch of questions about sort of the fundraising aspect of this. How much did it cost to create to sponsor a gargoyle, how much money was raised, uh, and did European gargoyles have sponsors as well? Has your research dug up any numbers that we could share?
Yeah, sure. So the question is, yeah, how much did a gargoyle cost? And because it was over a period of time, it was kind of a moving target. We don't know exactly how much each gargoyle cost. We do know we have a couple of numbers, and we know that sort of early on in the 60s, when they started putting gargoyles on and first started getting sponsors for them, it was about $30,000. So you can imagine $30,000 in like late 60s money. You can imagine how much that would equate to today. But I know that these days things have changed so much. There's only like 3 or 4 people left in the world who can do the fine carving that's required for a gargoyle like this, or the carvings that we're still putting on the cathedral. We're not doing any more carving on the outside of the cathedral, but we are doing some on the inside. There are some carvings on the human rights porch that we're working on right now. And I know that a carving of Mother Teresa that was put on a couple years ago, I heard the number of, I think it was about $70,000 just to do the work of carving it, without any sort of sponsorship bump on that. So they cost different amounts through history, but they were pretty expensive even from the start.
2 questions I'm going to sort of pair together, and that is, when was the construction of the cathedral completed, and when was the last gargoyle or grotesque added, which are not necessarily the same dates?
Right. Yeah. So the last gargoyle, which is a caveman pulling his chest back, was put up in, I think it was 1987 was the year that was installed, and 1990 was when they put the final finial on the top of the cathedral, marking its official completion. It was Teddy Roosevelt was the president who presided over the founding of the cathedral and the placement of its foundation stone, and the first President Bush was the president who was there for the final stone that was put in place. Of course, a cathedral like this is never really truly finished, and we've made additions to it since then. But that was the point where we called it done and had it dedicated, and there have been no gargoyles put on since then, although there have been some carvings added, especially on the inside.
There are a number of questions asking about the stone carvers themselves, and do we have a place where the full list of names can be found, whether any of the stone carvers are still alive? And specifically, someone asked about the Fanfannies and when they worked as stone carvers.
I'm afraid I don't have the years of the Fanfannies at my fingertips. I do know that if you get the book, there's a book called The Gargoyles of the Washington National Cathedral, and we tried to put a link to it in this presentation, but unfortunately the e-commerce site is shut down right now. But you can find it on, I believe you can find it on Amazon. And but anyway, there's a guidebook that lists exactly all of the gargoyles and many of the grotesques, and it shows exactly when they were carved, who donated it, who did the sculpting, and who did the actual carving. So if you look at that, you'll be able to see all of the carvers who worked on gargoyles and grotesques.
Yeah, and I know we've mentioned the Stone Carvers book and documentary film. There's both a book and a film. In the book, there's an appendix that has biographies of all the stone carvers as well. J. Hall Carpenter is still alive. Do you know if any of the other stone carvers? I think there are a couple who are still around.
There's the ones who are still working on the cathedral right now. And J. Hall Carpenter, is still a working sculptor. And as a matter of fact, my copy of Darth Vader is autographed by J. Hall Carpenter, the guy who did the carving for Darth Vader, as well as all of the angels in the Angel Band. And
right, you can't get that in our gift shop.
you can't get the autographed one, but
you can't get the autographed one, right?
He may if you contact him on Facebook, he might actually be willing to sign it for you. And he lives and works in Silver Spring, and he's a really, really nice guy.
Though you mentioned Sean Callahan and Andy Yule, who are still part of our Mason team doing work at the cathedral along with Joe Alonzo. I think Malcolm still around, and I think there are 2 or 3 other stone carvers who worked on the gargoyles who are still working stone carvers or are retired at this point.
Right. And then there's one guy named Walter Arnold who did an
Yeah,
awful lot of the stone carving, and he no longer works for the cathedral. He's in Chicago, but
right.
he's still a working stone carver and does some absolutely fabulous work that you can see on his Facebook page.
Yeah. And there was a question about a map and photos of locations, which again, it would be something that would be in the book.
Yeah, there also, and there used to be a self-guided gargoyle tour that you could download and then walk around the cathedral and see some of the gargoyles yourself. Do we still have that on the website?
We have some architectural spotlights that include some gargoyles as well as Darth Vader. I'm not sure about the downloadable walking tour right now. We have a number of specific questions, like why was there a turtle on the back of the dentist, and if there's a significance to that, or if it.
Yeah, we look at we see that turtle every single time, and we don't know what was going on with that. Something of significance to the family. I don't know if it was an in joke or a family symbol or something like that. Since they obviously asked for it to be there, but I'm afraid we don't know the story behind the turtle on the dentist's back there.
Similarly, somebody would like to know if there was any significance to the set of playing cards that I think that was on the Toothy Duck candid camera.
I have no idea, and it always boggles my mind, but that gargoyle really looks like it's about 3 different things just smushed together.
Yes. Someone wants to repeat the name of the film on YouTube. Is that
it's called the one that won the Oscar? Yeah, it's just called The Stonecarvers.
Yeah, it's on Vimeo, I think, and not YouTube, and there's a link in the chat to it. And yeah, somebody calls out that Walter Arnold is still alive. We have a request for needlepoint. I don't think that's one of your specialties, is it?
There is a specialty tour for needlepoint. That's not one that I do, and I don't know if we've done a spotlight on it, but I know that when touring resumes, which God willing will be soon, that we do in normal times have a needlepoint specialty tour. We also have ironwork, we have stained glass, we have all sorts of really, really wonderful specialty programs at the cathedral once we've reopened for touring.
Yeah. Do you know of any designs or carvings that were rejected? Are there any good stories there?
Oh, that's a really good question, and I don't know. I don't know of any stories where they said where the dean looked at it and said, "Yeah, no, try again." Okay.
And then a question about the stone carvers mason in the stone mason school that's at St. John the Divine in New York. Is there a relationship with that school? Do you know?
Not that I'm aware of. I know that most of the stone carvers that worked here, a lot of them were actually trained in the old country in Italy, and it's where the traditions of old craftsmanship were kept alive. And so you have names like Vince Palumbo and Roger Morigi and people that came over, and sometimes they would then send back to the old country and say, "Hey, I've got work," and you would get people coming over here almost in families. And I know that there were multiple generations at some points. So I think that they were mostly taught elsewhere or learned here on site. There were a couple of people like J. Hall Carpenter who showed up in almost like a traditional apprenticeship program and learned here on the job. So I don't know of any overlap with the stonemason school at St. John the Divine.
And then just somebody said, why not just use a pipe? Why create a gargoyle?
Because gargoyles are cool, because gargoyles are awesome, because something like this is so much neater than just a bare downspout. I mean, why have a Gothic cathedral? Why not just a big box that looks like a basketball stadium or something? Because the ornamentation is neat. It's decorated because we are giving our best to God. A lot of these carvings can't really be seen from the ground. There are a lot of them that are up so high they can't even be seen if you're climbing around on the tops of the towers. There are a couple of gargoyles and carvings that no docent that I'm aware of has ever seen. We know that they exist, but we can't get a good look at them. And they put that fabulous work up there because God can see it, because we give our best work to God. So that's one reason, and because they're awesome.
Well, Andrew, that feels like a perfect place to stop, especially to say that, no, you're awesome. Gargoyles are awesome, but you're awesome. And we really appreciate you taking the time to share your enthusiasm and knowledge about these incredible carvings, both scary and whimsical and sort of everything in between.
Well, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure. I believe we'll be offering this again at some point in the future. So tell your friends, we would be delighted to have you. And someday soon, we will be reopening the cathedral for in-person tours. And I would love to show you around in person because there's so much more to see and learn. I have been coming to the cathedral for 10 years, or way more than 10 years. I've been giving tours for 10 years. And I have never come here without seeing something new and learning something different about the cathedral. So it never stops giving. So thank you very much.
And if you're in the Washington area, even just dropping through, the grounds are open daily from dawn until dusk. We ask you to maintain social distance and wear your masking right now, but our grounds are open for visitation and we welcome you to our grounds. And as we said in the beginning, we will be sharing a link to the video recording of this session so you can watch it again and find more favorites and hear Andrew say awesome again.
So just one more question from the Q&A here. Someone says, why not get a drone to document the carvings? Drones are unfortunately illegal in Washington, D.C. It's controlled airspace because of the president and Air Force One and Marine One flying around. So we cannot, as much as we would like, fly a bunch of drones up around the tippity top parts of the towers. There's also the thing about being a little nervous about flying drones next to expensive stained glass windows.
Yeah, we're very close to the residence of the vice president as well.
Yeah.
So,
awesome. Well, thank you very much.
And thank you everyone for joining us today.